She had exactly 3 hours to escape before being sold to a man who buried his wives. At 18, Eliza had never known kindness. Only bruises, only fear, only the promise that her spirit would be broken by a monster named Horace Burke. But hidden in her boot was $42 from a stranger, a rancher in Colorado who promised her something she had never been offered before: safety without strings attached. So she ran. In the cold October darkness, she boarded a train heading west, gambling her entire future on a man she had never met. What she didn't know? This lonely rancher carried his own demons. His mother died in childbirth. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 years, and dangerous enemies were circling his land like wolves. When Eliza arrived at that remote mountain cabin, she thought she was escaping one nightmare. She had no idea she was walking straight into another. But here's the twist. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. And sometimes two broken people can build something unbreakable together. This story will show you that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing hope when everything inside you screams to give up. If you've ever felt trapped, underestimated, or wondered if you deserve better, this one is for you. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever taken a terrifying leap of faith that changed your life? And if stories like this speak to your soul, hit that subscribe button and join our family. Now, let's get into it. The ugly bruise on her cheek was a constant reminder. Her guardian, Marlene, had told her the buyer would enjoy breaking her spirit. That promise was the only push Eliza needed to finally run. The buyer, Horace Burke, was a man who buried wives. Folks whispered about screams out on his farm. In the quiet before dawn, Eliza knew she had to be gone. Everything she owned fit in a small bundle: a single change of clothes, a broken comb, and a photo of her parents. She reread the wrinkled newspaper clipping. An honest rancher in Colorado needed a helpmate. The ad promised protection and respectful partnership with no romantic expectations. To a girl like Eliza, that sounded safer than any love song she had ever heard. She had written to him, promising to be a hard worker who needed only safety, not affection. She never expected a reply, but the rancher, Caleb Rowan, wrote back. His letter was blunt. He said he was not a gentleman, but he was not a cruel one either. He promised to meet her at the station on the 15th of October and keep his word. Inside the envelope was $42. It was more money than she had ever seen. She hid it in her boot, bought the ticket yesterday, and today she was finally using it to get away for good. She crept down the creaking stairs, past the room where Victor snored. Luckily, the front door lock had been broken for months. The cold October air that hit her face felt like freedom itself. She stepped into the gray streets of Philadelphia and did not look back. The walk to the station was long, and every footstep on the cobblestones sounded like a drum. She walked fast, trying to look like she had somewhere important to be. At last, the gas lamps of the Grand Station came into view, a safe harbor in the dark. Inside, Eliza blended into the morning crowd, years of being invisible finally paying off. At the window, her voice was steady when she asked for a ticket to Denver. The man stamped it and pointed her to track 4. As she waited in the shadows, she watched a well-dressed couple pass by, laughing together. The man carried his wife's bag, and they looked so easy and happy. Eliza had to look away. A life with gentle hands and shared laughter was not for girls like her. She had learned that lesson the hard way, over and over again. As the train jerked forward, leaving the grime of Philadelphia behind, Eliza finally allowed herself a small bit of hope. The city, Marlene, and Horace Burke were all in her past. Only the unknown lay ahead. For 3 days, she watched the country change from her window. The crowded cities gave way to rolling farms, and then to the plains of Kansas, so wide open it nearly scared her. After a life squeezed between dirty buildings, the enormous sky felt like a promise. For the first time, the future felt less like a threat and more like a chance. For 18 long years, Eliza Hart had known nothing but cruelty. Now, sitting on a train chugging west, every click of the wheels was a sound of freedom. She was a young woman, all alone, running from a past too dark to speak of, with just a few coins and a letter from a stranger named Caleb Rowan. His promise wasn't of love, but of a life that wasn't cruel. For Eliza, that was more than enough. But as the plains turned to mountains, a terrible fear took hold. What if this was all just another trap? This story is about the courage it takes to gamble on hope when all you have ever known is pain. The train whistle echoed through the mountains as it pulled away from Crescent Ridge, Colorado. It left Eliza standing all by herself on a tiny wooden platform. The October wind cut right through her thin coat, and the towering peaks made her feel impossibly small. She clutched her little bundle of belongings and scanned the handful of buildings, her heart pounding in her chest. He could be anyone, or he could be no one at all, a ghost who had already changed his mind. Just as despair began to set in, she saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood in the shadows at the end of the platform. He wore a worn coat and a hat pulled down low. He just watched her, his silence unnerving. Eliza forced her shaking legs to walk toward him. Up close, she saw a man in his 30s with a weathered face and dark, cautious eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had also seen his share of hardship. Eliza Hart? His voice was low and raspy. Yes, she whispered. Caleb Rowan? He gave a single sharp nod. They stood there for a moment, two strangers sizing each other up. You're younger than I figured, he said, not unkindly. I'm 18, she replied, her voice stronger now. Old enough to know what I'm choosing. A flicker of respect crossed his face. He noticed her shivering and said, You look half frozen. When's the last time you had a proper meal? The simple question, the small bit of concern, almost broke her. At the town's boarding house, over a bowl of hot stew, Caleb laid out the truth of her new life. The ranch is isolated, he began. Winters are long and hard. The work is sunup to sundown. I can't offer you wages, but you'll have a home, your own space, and safety. He looked her straight in the eye. I need to know the real reason you're here, Eliza. She met his gaze without flinching. I'm here because my other choices were a life of being used or a life on the street. Your letter promised a hard life, but an honest one. That's a better offer than I've ever had. Imagine being given a choice. Marry a complete stranger, or be sold to a man who gets rid of his wives. That was the corner I was backed into. My own family was ready to hand me over. I had 3 hours to escape, so when Caleb's advertisement offered a partnership, I took it. He was surprised by my honesty. He just said, That is dark. I told him it was true, and that my past was behind me now. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I am not good with people. I am awkward and quiet. I've been alone on that ranch for 3 years. He rubbed the back of his neck. What I am is honest. I keep my word. I will not raise my hand to you, and I will work myself to the bone to make sure you are protected. That word, protection, felt like a warm stone in my chest. He explained the marriage would be legal but private. I would have my own room. There were no romantic expectations. This was just a practical arrangement. I told him I understood. But he leaned forward, his eyes full of genuine concern. Do you? That ranch is isolated. You will be alone with me, miles from town. If I am not the man I claim to be, you will have no way out. I looked at this clumsy, awkward man. He was trying to give me an escape route to protect me from himself. Mr. Rowan, I said, I have lived with cruel men who pretended to care. I know the difference between a man who wants to control and a man who is just alone. He was not a liar. He was just lonely. And so was I. A look of relief washed over Caleb's face, maybe even a little hope. Are you sure? He asked. I admitted I was terrified, but I was sure. He nodded slowly and stood up. He left a few coins on the table and said, There is a minister 3 buildings down. We can be married before dark. My heart started pounding. This was it. No more second thoughts. I stood up with my small bag and said I was ready. The ceremony was shockingly brief. We stood in a stranger's parlor while the minister read from a worn book. When he asked for a ring, Caleb's face turned red. "I did not think to get one," he mumbled. "It is fine," I said quickly. But Caleb was already pulling a thin, tarnished silver ring from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "It is the only thing I have of hers, if you want it." He was offering me the only piece of his family he had left. A sudden wave of emotion tightened my throat. "Are you sure?" I whispered. He nodded. She would want someone to wear it, someone who needed it. I held out my hand, and he slipped the old ring onto my finger. Just like that, I was no longer Eliza Hart. I was Eliza Rowan. We had a new life, built on equal parts faith and fear. Caleb did not kiss me. He just led me outside to a wagon hitched to 2 horses. He said 3 hours to the ranch. The wagon lurched forward, and the town of Crescent Ridge faded behind us. We rode in silence as the road climbed into the massive ancient mountains. The air smelled of pine and cold water. It was a wild and foreign world. After an hour, Caleb asked, "You all right?" I just said yes. I told him it was a lot to take in, but I would adapt. He seemed to approve of that. As the sun disappeared, the mountain air grew cold. I shivered in my thin coat. Without a word, Caleb pulled a thick wool blanket from behind the seat and draped it over my shoulders. The gesture was simple and practical, but the warmth was a desperate relief. He just nodded and kept his eyes on the dark road ahead. The wagon wheels stopped turning, and the world went quiet. Caleb pointed to a small log cabin glowing in the lantern light. "That's home," he said. After helping Eliza down, his hands barely touching her waist, he stepped back. "I'll see to the horses. Go on inside and get warm." Eliza's heart hammered as she pushed open the door to a stranger's house. She had married this man, Caleb, just 4 hours ago. The full weight of what she had done hit her like a punch. She had run from a life of misery straight into the arms of a man she did not know. This could be a terrible mistake. But the small cabin was warm and clean. Through the window, she saw Caleb tending to his horses before himself. A small but decent act. He had given her a chance to back out, a chance to escape. A man with harm on his mind would not do that. When Caleb came inside, they stood like statues in the firelight. Husband and wife, but complete strangers. "You must be tired," he finally said. "I'll sleep out here on the floor. The bedroom is yours." His voice was firm. "I gave you my word. You get your own space." The room was small, with just a bed and a washstand, but it was a start. And it was the first room in her 18 years of life that was truly hers. Eliza turned away so Caleb would not see the sudden tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "I'll keep my word." She closed the door and wrapped herself in the heavy quilts. For the first time, Eliza went to sleep knowing she was safe, believing that the quiet man on the other side of the door was someone who kept his promises. It was not love, not yet. But for a girl who had nothing, this beginning felt like everything. Eliza woke up to a silence so deep it was startling. The room was freezing, her breath turning to mist in the air. She dressed quickly and opened her door to find the main room empty. Caleb's blankets were already folded neatly and a fresh fire was roaring in the stove. A pot of hot coffee sat waiting. Outside, she could see Caleb already at his chores, moving with a quiet purpose in the cold morning air. This man worked from sunup to sundown, and he had still found a moment to make her coffee. It was another small kindness she did not expect. When Caleb came inside with milk and eggs, he seemed surprised to find her awake. "Morning," he said a little awkwardly. "I usually eat at sunrise. I can cook, but it's nothing fancy." The words tumbled out of her. "I can cook. That's part of the reason I'm here. To help." He looked at her for a long moment, a new understanding in his eyes. Then he nodded. "All right, if you're sure." Eliza got to work finding flour, salt, and lard. She would prove she was worth the risk he had taken. She would make this lonely cabin a home. Some folks run from trouble. Eliza was running from kindness that cut deeper than any whip. In this remote mountain cabin, she found Caleb Rowan, a man as quiet as the wilderness around them. He spoke of the root cellar, filled with potatoes and onions left by the last owner who could not handle the isolation. As she cooked eggs, Caleb said most people break up here. He asked if the quiet bothered her. She shook her head. People were never kind to me, she explained. Being alone is just honest. The mountains do not lie. He watched her for a long moment. Then he said, his voice a little softer, "It is Caleb. You can just call me Caleb." After they ate, he showed her the place. There were 2 horses, a milk cow, and some chickens. He pointed to the high meadows where his cattle grazed. He explained that the real work would start when the snows came. Up here, there was a harsh beauty, and a kind of freedom she had never known. The constant weight of her old life in Philadelphia began to lift. There was no cruel mistress watching her, no drunken rages to fear. There was only the land, the sky, and a quiet man who seemed to keep his promises. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. She told Caleb she needed to work. Idleness had always earned her a punishment. He seemed to understand and gave her small tasks. He taught her how to churn butter while he mended a fence. He never spoke down to her. He treated her like a partner. Her hands were sore, but her spirit felt alive. Later, while exploring the small cabin, she found a photograph on a shelf. It showed a stern-looking man and woman. "My parents," Caleb said from behind her. She turned, embarrassed to be caught looking through his things. "It is your house now, too," he said gently. He picked up the picture. They died from influenza, both in the same week. It was a long time ago. He explained he came west to escape the ghosts. "That is why I needed a wife," he admitted. "The ranch is too much for one man." He hesitated, then added, "I am not good with people, Eliza. I tried courting a girl once. It was a disaster." A small smile touched Eliza's lips. "I brought her wildflowers," he said with a sigh. "Turns out she was allergic. After that, I figured I was meant to be alone. I needed a partner, not a romance. And I," Eliza said softly, "needed safety, not love." Their days soon fell into a comfortable rhythm. He did the heavy ranch work, and she managed the house. They worked in a quiet understanding, building a life together one day at a time. Eliza found she was good at this life. Her hands, once scarred from city labor, grew strong with country work. She learned to bake bread, milk the cow, and mend his clothes. Trust grew in the silence between them. One evening, she made a stew from a rabbit Caleb had caught. He came in from the barn, tired and cold. "That smells good," he said. He took a bite, then another. His eyes met hers across the small table. "This is the best meal I have had since my mother passed away." His honest words were worth more than 1,000 compliments. After dinner, he spoke of the winter coming. "We need to bring the cattle down, cut more firewood, and seal the house against the cold. It will be long, hard days." "I am not afraid of work," Eliza told him. "I know," Caleb said, looking at her with real respect. "You are stronger than you look, tougher." "I figured you'd be too delicate for this country," Caleb admitted. But Eliza just shook her head. "I'm not just surviving, Caleb. I'm finally living." A flicker of old pain crossed his face. "I know that feeling." As winter loomed, they worked without rest. He taught her to ride a gentle mare named Sage, and soon she was helping him drive cattle down from the high pastures. The first time, she stayed in the saddle for 4 hours, helping move 20 head. Every muscle screamed, but Caleb's simple words, "You did good today," made it all worthwhile. Amidst the endless work, a surprising peace settled over Eliza. The small cabin began to feel like a real home, filled with the smell of baking bread. More importantly, she felt at home in her own skin for the first time. The tired, frightened girl from the city was gone, replaced by a stronger woman. Then, one October afternoon, angry voices shattered the quiet. A weathered man on horseback, a rifle across his saddle, was arguing with Caleb. "That fence of yours is 3 feet on my side, Rowan," the man snarled. "My cattle can't reach the creek." Caleb stood his ground. "The fence is where the surveyor marked it, Hayes. I've got the papers." The man just spat on the ground. "I've used that land for 15 years, Hayes growled. "Then you've been trespassing for 15 years, Caleb replied, his voice steely calm. Hayes's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Eliza. A greasy smile spread across his face. "Well now, heard you got a mail order wife, pretty little thing." He looked her up and down like she was livestock. "She's none of your business," Caleb said, his voice dropping low and dangerous. Hayes just chuckled. "I'll be back about that fence. Maybe when it's just your little woman here." Caleb's reply was ice. "You come near her, and it'll be the last thing you do." Hayes finally rode off, leaving a tense silence in his wake. "That's Marcus Hayes," Caleb explained, his jaw tight. "He's a bully who's always looking for weakness." Eliza touched his arm. "I know his type." Caleb's voice was fierce. "Not here. Not while I'm alive. I'm teaching you to use a rifle tomorrow. You have to be able to protect yourself." That night the air was thick with tension. Caleb kept checking the door, unable to settle. "Men like Hayes are patient," he said. "They wait for their chance." Eliza looked him straight in the eye. "Then we won't give him one." The surprise on his face was plain to see. "We?" she confirmed. "I'm not some fragile flower, Caleb. I survived 18 years you can't even imagine. This is our home now, and I won't let him threaten it." A look of deep respect dawned on Caleb's face. "All right," he said. "We'll make this ranch a tough target." The next morning, he took her to a clearing with tin cans on a log. He showed her how to hold the heavy rifle, brace for the kick, and always know her target. Her heart pounded as she took aim and squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, slamming hard into her shoulder. The shot kicked up dirt 3 feet wide of the mark. "Breathe out as you squeeze," Caleb coached. She kept trying, her shoulder aching. On the 10th shot, a can finally spun off the log. "See," he said, a smile in his voice. "Took me 20 tries when my pa taught me." His casual talk of by spring filled her with a quiet warmth. This was real. This was her life now. Soon the first heavy snow fell, blanketing the world in a deep, silent white. When Caleb came in from the cold, his eyes were bright. "Welcome to winter," he said, stomping his boots. "We'll have about 6 months of this." 6 months, snowed in with this quiet, steady man. 2 months later, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a home. One evening, Caleb spoke up, his voice rough with words he was not used to saying. "You've done more than I ever expected. Thank you for staying, for making this work." Eliza looked up from her mending, her heart full. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said. "For treating me like—" She trailed off, her throat tight with emotion. "Like what?" he asked gently. "Like a person," she whispered. "Not a burden. Just a person." Caleb's gaze was steady. "That's the bare minimum, Eliza. You deserve a whole lot more than that." The ring on my finger felt heavy. I told him, "This partnership is the best thing that has ever happened to me." Caleb stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the snowy darkness. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, bringing you here," he said softly. "You could have had a better life." I walked over to him. "Better how? With a man who would have killed me? This is the first time in my life I've gone to sleep without being afraid. The first time I've woken up knowing no one will hurt me. You gave me that." Caleb looked at me, and his expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like wonder. He reached out and gently touched my shoulder. It was a brief, careful touch. "Then I'm glad you're here," he said. His jaw tightened, and after a long silence he simply said, "All right then." Outside, the first heavy snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white. It was quietly sealing them in together. In that small, warm boarding house, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in her entire life. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was the start of a partnership. It was a flicker of hope. And she was beginning to understand that sometimes hope is all you need to face whatever comes next. She slowly learned Caleb's quiet ways. He would mutter to himself when solving a problem. Sometimes nightmares made him cry out names she did not know. And on the coldest mornings in the barn, he sang terribly off-key as if to keep the loneliness away. In turn, Caleb learned the patterns of her past life. She always woke before the sun, a habit from 18 years of avoiding punishment. She would hide extra bread in her room, as if expecting a famine. She still flinched at sudden movements. They never spoke of these things, but a quiet understanding grew between them like the winter frost. The work was hard. Caleb tended to the cattle in the frozen pastures, breaking ice on their water trough twice a day. Eliza managed the house, the chickens that had stopped laying, and the horses that watched her with hopeful eyes. One gray afternoon, as snow fell in lazy flakes, Eliza was churning butter. She felt a strange flutter inside her belly and froze, her hands tight on the handle. It happened again, a tiny, undeniable movement. She sat down hard, her mind racing. She had been so busy surviving that she had not noticed her monthly courses had stopped. She had blamed it on stress and hard work, but she was wrong. The truth settled over her, quiet and life-changing. She was pregnant. It was Caleb's child. There had been one night, just one. 3 weeks after she arrived, a storm had torn through the barn roof. They worked for hours in the freezing rain to save the animals. Back in the house, shaking with cold and relief, it just happened. An awkward, desperate moment they were too mortified to ever speak of again. They tried to pretend that night never happened, to fall back into the quiet rhythm of their arrangement, but the consequences were very real. Eliza placed a hand on her belly, a mix of terror and wonder blooming in her chest. A baby. She was going to have a baby out here, miles from a doctor, with only Caleb to see her through it. She thought of his nightmares and the worn picture of his parents. He once mentioned his own mother died in childbirth. A cold dread washed over her. Just then, the door blew open. Caleb stood there, covered in snow. He looked worn out. "Storm's getting worse," he said, shaking off his coat. He stopped when he saw her face. "Eliza, you all right? You look pale." She took a deep breath. "Caleb, I have to tell you something." The seriousness in her voice made him freeze. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. All the color drained from Caleb's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, his eyes wide with a terror that broke her heart. "How far along?" he whispered. "About 3 months, I think. I just felt the baby move." Caleb turned away sharply, bracing his hands against the window frame. His whole body was tense. After a long silence, Eliza spoke his name. "My mother," he said, his voice rough. "She died having my sister. The baby died, too. I was 12 years old." He turned back to her, his eyes full of pain. "I watched my father fall apart after that. I swore I would never put anyone through that. I can't lose you, Eliza. I just can't." "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said softly, moving closer to him. "You can't know that," he argued, his voice rising. "We're snowed in, miles from any help. If something goes wrong, I can't do a thing." Eliza placed her hand over his clenched fist. "Listen to me. I am young, and I am strong. I promise you I will fight. I will not give up." She waited for him to meet her eyes. "Now I need you to promise me something. Promise you won't let fear make you treat me like I'm made of glass. I need you to trust me." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I'll try." It wasn't a perfect promise, but it was an honest start. The next few weeks were a test. Caleb watched her every move, trying to do all the heavy work himself. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," Eliza finally snapped one morning. They stood in the cold air, two stubborn, scared people in a situation neither understood. "I don't know how to do this," Caleb admitted, his voice low. "I don't know how to not be terrified." "Neither do I," she answered gently. "But we'll figure it out together, just like everything else." So they found a new rhythm. They started talking more in the evenings, sharing their hopes and their fears. "I want this baby," Caleb said one night, with a sudden fire in his voice. "I'm scared, but I want this family." As her belly grew, Eliza felt the baby's kicks become stronger. One evening, she took Caleb's hand and placed it on her stomach. The look of pure wonder on his face as he felt the kick brought tears to her eyes. "Strong," he whispered. "Takes after their father." He looked at her then, his expression changing. "Eliza," he started, struggling for the words. "This began as a business deal, but somewhere along the way, you became my wife. A real wife, not just a name on a piece of paper." "I know," she said softly, touching his face. "It became real for me, too. I care about you, Caleb, more than I thought I could." He gently took her hand, pressing it to his cheek. "I'm not good with words," he said. "You don't have to be," she smiled. "I see you, Caleb Rowan. I see the cradle you're building in the barn when you think I'm not looking, and I'm not afraid of what I see." He kissed her then, a sweet, clumsy kiss full of things he couldn't say. She kissed him back, this quiet man who had given her a safe place and had ended up giving her his heart. A few weeks later, a warm spell melted some of the snow. Caleb rode into town for supplies. Eliza was folding laundry that afternoon when she heard a horse outside. She smiled, thinking Caleb was home early. But when she looked out the window, her blood ran cold. It was Marcus Hayes, and he was looking at her house like a wolf looks at a sheep, and Caleb's rifle was in the barn. Everything Caleb had warned her about came true in that moment. She could hide, or she could face him and prove she was not easy prey. The memory of 18 years of being small and invisible rose up inside her. But she was not that girl anymore. She was Eliza Rowan, a mother-to-be, and this was her home. She would not cower. Eliza opened the door and stood on the porch, her chin high. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice clear, "my husband is not home. I suggest you come back another time." Hayes smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I can see that. It is not very protective of him to leave you alone in your condition. I do not need protection from neighbors who respect boundaries." "Boundaries?" Hayes swung down from his horse. "That is what I came to talk about. Your husband's boundaries are causing problems. Then you can take it up with Caleb when he is home, with witnesses. Now, why would we need witnesses?" He took another step closer. "This is just a friendly conversation." Eliza's hands curled into fists. The rifle was in the barn, too far away. "I can see that you are trespassing," she said, her voice like steel. "I can see that you were told to leave. And I can see that you are testing a pregnant woman who is all alone." Something flickered in his eyes, maybe surprise. "You are going to get back on your horse," Eliza stated, taking a step forward. "You are going to leave. And if you show up here uninvited again, I will shoot first and ask questions later. You do not even have a gun." "Don't I?" she bluffed, her heart pounding. "My husband taught me how to protect this ranch. You can test that, or you can leave." Hayes stared at her for a long moment. A thin, dangerous smile crossed his face. "You have got spirit. I will give you that." He mounted his horse. "But spirit does not change property lines. You tell your husband this discussion is not over. Out here, pretty words and legal papers mean nothing when the snow gets deep. Accidents happen." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Eliza kept her expression still. "I will tell him you trespassed and threatened a pregnant woman. I imagine the sheriff will be quite interested." Hayes's face hardened. Be careful, Mrs. Rowan. You do not want me as an enemy. You made us an enemy when you decided we were easy prey." He wheeled his horse around and left. Only when he was gone did Eliza's body start to shake from a terror she had held back. When Caleb got home, he saw her face and his own went pale. "What is wrong?" She told him everything. He paced the porch, his voice tight with a rage he could barely contain. "He came here. He threatened you while I was gone. I took care of it. But you should not have had to." "Caleb, this is not your fault," Eliza said, stopping him. "Hayes was going to try something sooner or later. Now he knows I am not some helpless little thing. But what if he returns? Then the rifle will be loaded and ready. We knew this life would be a fight. We will face this fight together." Caleb pulled her into a fierce hug. "I cannot lose you," he whispered. "Not to him, not to anything." "You will not," she promised. "We are going to have this baby and build our life. Hayes will not take that from us." That evening they made a plan. Caleb would ride to town and speak to the sheriff. He would also warn their neighbors. Eliza would keep the rifle close. March brought heavy snows that buried the ranch. As Eliza's belly grew, so did the baby's strong kicks and turns. She moved with the slow, aching grace of late pregnancy. Caleb watched her with a mix of wonder and pure fear. He finished carving a cradle with mountains and stars. He read medical books from the town doctor, his worry growing with every page he turned. "What if the baby is early?" he asked one night. "What if something goes wrong? Then we will handle it," Eliza said, trying to sound brave. "Women have babies in wild places all the time." "And they died doing it," Caleb replied. The fear was a real thing between them, sharp and cold. "Caleb, look at me," she said, waiting for his eyes to meet hers. "I need you to believe in me. If you do not, I am not sure I can do this." Her words finally reached him. He took a long, shaky breath. "You are the strongest woman I know. If anyone can do this, it is you. Then trust in that. Trust in me." "I do," he said, taking her hands. "I trust you with everything." A month later, the snow began to melt. The town doctor visited, checking on Eliza. 2 weeks, maybe 3, he said. "You are healthy and the baby feels strong. But first, babies can be hard, and you are a long way from help if things go bad." "We know the risks," Eliza told him. The doctor just nodded, leaving them with clean cloths and instruments. After he left, Eliza found Caleb in the barn, his face a mask of worry. "It will be all right," she told him. "You say that like you know it for sure." "I will make it true," she said, touching his cheek. "I did not survive 18 years of misery just to fail now." A small, real smile touched Caleb's lips. "You are a fierce one. I had to be." "Well, I am thankful for it," he said, pulling her close. "Our child is lucky to have you." They stood together, waiting for the beautiful, terrifying storm of new life. On a Tuesday morning in late April, the first pain hit her. It was like a fist squeezing her middle, stealing her breath. She gripped the table until her knuckles turned white. Then it was gone. Minutes later, it came back, stronger this time. The morning sun was bright and Caleb was out in the high pasture. He would not be home for hours. This was it. After all the waiting and worrying, the time was here. Eliza forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. She followed the plan they had practiced. She boiled water and laid out the doctor's supplies. The contractions grew closer, first every 15 minutes, then every 10. When Caleb came home, he found her leaning over the table, breathing through the pain. His face went pale. "How long has this been going on?" "Since morning," she said. "They are about 8 minutes apart. I have to get the doctor." "Caleb," she said, waiting for the pain to pass, "there is no time. You would never make it to town and back. We have to do this ourselves." "Have you ever faced a fear so big it threatened to swallow you whole?" That's where Caleb found himself, haunted by the memory of his mother's death as he tried to help his wife Eliza bring their first child into the world. This is a story about finding courage when you feel smallest, and it shows why a helping hand from a neighbor is worth more than gold. Caleb was terrified, but Eliza grabbed his face. "I need you calm," she said. "Can you do that for me?" He nodded, and together they faced the long afternoon. When the pain made it too hard to walk, he helped her to the bed, letting her grip his hand with all her might. He whispered words of encouragement, telling her how strong she was. "I don't feel strong," she breathed, exhausted. As evening fell, the pain grew worse, and Eliza felt a new fear creep in. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "It shouldn't hurt this much." Caleb tried to soothe her, but his own terror was plain to see. He was reliving a nightmare, afraid he would lose them both. "Caleb, look at me," Eliza said, her voice firm despite the pain. "I am not your mother. I am not going to die." Near midnight, everything changed. Eliza felt an overwhelming urge to push. "I think it's time," she gasped. With a mix of fear and resolve, Caleb steadied himself. "All right, tell me what to do." He helped her sit up, his hands shaking but gentle. With a mighty effort, Eliza pushed. "I can see the head," Caleb exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. "Keep going, you're almost there." She pushed again and again, guided by his voice and a strength she did not know she possessed. The pain was immense, but it now had a purpose. It was leading them to their child. "One more," he urged, "one more big push." With a final heroic effort, Eliza felt a rush of release, and their baby slipped into Caleb's waiting hands. For a heart-stopping moment, the room was silent. Then a tiny cry filled the air. "It's a girl," Caleb sobbed. "We have a daughter." He gently placed the perfect tiny baby on Eliza's chest. Love, fierce and instant, washed over her. "Hello, little one," she whispered through tears. "I'm your mother." After Caleb tended to them both, he sat on the bed, staring in wonder. "You did it," he said softly. She reached for his hand. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." "I was terrified the entire time," he admitted. "So was I," she smiled. "But we survived." They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother. As the sun rose, Eliza held her sleeping daughter, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. The next few days were a blur of wonder and exhaustion. Caleb took care of everything, his relief and determination showing in every move. He cooked, cleaned, and watched over his family, terrified of losing what he had almost lost. "You need to rest too," Eliza told him, but he wouldn't stop. He was finally a father, and he was a good one. Imagine being a new mother, miles from anywhere, when trouble rides right up to your doorstep. For Eliza Rowan, holding her 2-week-old baby, Sarah, that trouble had a name: Marcus Hayes. This is a story about how a mother's love can be fiercer than any bully's greed. It shows that when good people stand together, even the worst villains have to back down. One afternoon, while her husband Caleb was out working the far pasture, Eliza saw Hayes and his men approaching. Fear shot through her, but she grabbed their rifle and stood between the door and her sleeping baby. Hayes stomped onto her porch without an invitation. "I'm here to discuss a business proposition," he said, his smile all teeth. "We're not interested," Eliza told him, holding the rifle ready. His face hardened. "That's a shame," he sneered. "Accidents happen out here. It would be a pity if something happened to your barn, your water, or your new baby." The threat was as clear as day. A cold fury burned away Eliza's fear. Just then, Sarah started to cry from inside the house. "Here's my choice," Eliza said, her voice dangerously calm. "You will get off our land right now. If you ever come near my family again, I will shoot you. And out here, no one is going to question a mother protecting her child." Hayes was stunned into silence. He clearly expected her to crumble. "You're making a mistake," he finally managed to say. "No," Eliza countered, stepping forward. "You made the mistake when you thought a new mother was a weak one." After a tense moment, Hayes and his men turned and rode away, shouting threats over their shoulders. As soon as they were gone, Eliza's strength gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps, shaking. When Caleb came home, he found her nursing Sarah, the rifle propped against the wall. He saw the look on her face, and his own went pale. She told him everything. Caleb's anger was a quiet, dangerous thing. "He threatened our daughter," he whispered, his hands clenched into fists. "I handled it," Eliza said. "But we can't live in fear, Caleb. We have to fight back." He looked at his wife, and then at his tiny daughter, and saw the truth in her words. The next morning, Caleb rode into town and went straight to the sheriff. He filed an official complaint and then talked to other ranchers who had been bullied by Hayes. He came back with good news. Their neighbors were willing to stand with them, and the sheriff had issued a formal warning to Hayes. Any more trouble and Hayes would be arrested. The weeks that followed were filled with tension, but Hayes never returned. Word got around that he was complaining about stubborn newcomers, but his direct threats had stopped. The power of a united community was something his money could not buy. Life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. Sarah began to grow, her little coos and gurgles filling the small cabin. Caleb, who had once been so afraid of being a father, was now completely captivated by his daughter. One evening, as Sarah gripped his finger, he looked at Eliza and said, "I cannot believe we made something so perfect." Eliza smiled, tired but happy. Looking at her husband and child, she knew they had built more than a home. They had built a family strong enough to face down any threat together. One sunny afternoon, a wagon pulled up. It was Mrs. Chen, their neighbor, along with two other women from nearby ranches. "We heard you had some trouble with that man Hayes," Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile. "We came to see how you and the new baby are getting along." The women brought gifts, a beautiful quilt, jars of preserves, and a hot meal. They brought something even more valuable, though. They brought friendship. Kindness from this small community still took Eliza by surprise, and she felt tears welling in her eyes. "You handled Hayes well," said one of the women, Margaret. "It took courage to stand up to him." "I was just scared," Eliza admitted. "Courage ain't about not being scared, dear," Margaret replied. "It's about doing what's right anyway." Mrs. Chen added, "Men like Hayes wait for folks to be alone. That's why we're here. To let you know you aren't. If you need anything, you send word. We'll come." That simple promise of solidarity meant the world. When Caleb came in later, he found Eliza crying softly. "What's wrong?" he asked, worried. "Nothing," she smiled through her tears. "Everything is right. For the first time in my life, I have a home." The quilt was beautiful, hand-stitched with care. "I have never had anything like this," she whispered. Caleb pulled her and their new daughter, Sarah, into his arms. "You have it now. You have me. You have Sarah. You have a home." He kissed her head. "You have a real life, Eliza. One you built with your own courage." "We built it," she corrected softly. "Together." That night, after Sarah was asleep, they sat by the fire. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said quietly. "I love you." The words were rough but real. "I do not know when it happened. Maybe when you stood up to Hayes, or maybe it was in 100 small moments. But I love you, Eliza, as my wife." Tears burned in her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have for a while. I was just afraid to say it." "Everything has already changed," he said, touching her face. "You changed everything. The moment you decided to trust me, to build this life with me." She kissed him with everything she had, a deep and honest kiss. When they finally broke apart, smiling and out of breath, Eliza felt a sense of completeness. This partnership, this family, was what she had been searching for all along. The ranch was more than a safe place now. It was their home. The future was built on choosing each other, day after day. Summer came on strong, painting the mountainsides with wild flowers. Little Sarah was now a happy 3-month-old, whose laugh made all the hard work feel worthwhile. Eliza had found her rhythm, balancing the endless work of the ranch with caring for their daughter. Caleb had even made a sling so she could carry Sarah while she worked. But they both knew their peace was on borrowed time. Hayes had been quiet for 2 long months, and that silence felt like the calm before a big storm. The storm hit on a blistering June afternoon. Eliza was in the garden when she heard the panicked sound of their cattle. Caleb came running from the barn, his face grim. "Something spooked the herd," he said, grabbing his horse. "I've got to stop them before they break the fence onto Hayes' land." Eliza's stomach clenched. "Be careful," she whispered. He paused before riding off. "Keep Sarah inside and keep that rifle handy. I've got a bad feeling about this." Caleb galloped away, leaving Eliza with their sleeping baby and a heavy sense of dread. She took Sarah inside and stood watch with the rifle, waiting. The minutes stretched into an eternity under the hot, still sun. Soon she heard a horse approaching, not with Caleb's urgency, but with a slow, deliberate pace. Marcus Hayes rode into their yard as if he owned the place, a smug look on his face. He was alone, which felt even more threatening. Eliza met him on the porch, rifle in hand, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "You're trespassing, Mr. Hayes." "Am I now?" he drawled, swinging down from his horse. "Funny thing, some of my fence was cut, and your cattle wandered right onto my land." Eliza saw his plan instantly. "You cut your own fence. You drove our herd." Hayes just smiled. "Can't prove that, but I can prove your cattle are on my property, and the law says I can hold them until you pay for damages." He took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. "Or you could convince Caleb to sell me those water rights, and this all goes away." Just then, Sarah started to cry from inside the house, and Hayes's cruel smile widened. "A baby to feed, winter coming on. It'd be a shame to lose it all over a little pride." Eliza leveled the rifle at his chest. "Get off our land." Just as Hayes scoffed at her, the sound of several horses filled the air. Caleb rode in, and right behind him were Margaret, Mrs. Chen, and other ranchers from the valley. Most importantly, Sheriff Morrison was with them, his badge shining in the sun. Hayes's face turned to stone. "Well now, Marcus," the sheriff said calmly, "I was just looking at that fence you reported. Funny thing is, the wire was cut from your side, and I have witnesses who saw you riding this way with wire cutters." The sheriff shook his head, his voice like steel. "You've bullied your last neighbor, Marcus. You're under arrest for trespass, destruction of property, and attempted extortion." As a deputy led a sputtering Hayes away, the whole valley seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. With the danger gone, Eliza's legs felt like jelly. Her hands trembled as she lowered the rifle. Caleb rushed to her side, checking her over. "I am fine," she assured him, leaning into his strength. He explained how he knew trouble was brewing. Those cattle did not stampede on their own. He reckoned Hayes was making his move, so he rode like the wind for the sheriff and their neighbors. He could not bear the thought of Hayes finding her alone again. But Eliza stood tall. I was not the same scared girl he remembered. Margaret gave her a knowing nod. "You did good, Mrs. Rowan. You stood your ground." The sheriff's investigation soon laid bare all of Hayes's dirty dealings. For years he had been bullying folks, staying just inside the law until his greed for their water pushed him over the edge. The trial did not take long. With so many folks speaking out against him, Hayes was found guilty. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and had to pay back every family he had wronged. His big ranch, buried in debt, was sold off. Margaret's sons bought the land next to theirs, guaranteeing good neighbors for years to come. One evening on the porch, Caleb said, "It is finally over. We can breathe now." Eliza admitted it felt strange not waiting for the other shoe to drop. Caleb took her hand. "We will learn how to just be happy together." And as the seasons turned, that is exactly what they did. The ranch prospered under their care. Eliza's sharp mind and Caleb's hard work were a perfect match. Little Sarah grew into a handful, stubborn and curious, just like her parents. One evening, Caleb led Eliza to the barn. He showed her a beautiful wooden chest he had been carving in secret. It was covered in mountains and stars. In the middle it said, "For Sarah." He planned to fill it with stories of her mother's courage so she would always know the strength she came from. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She told Caleb that Sarah would never have to learn her own worth the hard way because she would see it every day in her mother. He pulled her close, saying that was the gift they were giving their daughter, the knowledge that she was important and her voice mattered. The second winter on the mountain felt different. Their home was warm, their cellar was full, and they were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. Sarah saw her first snow, her eyes wide with wonder, as Caleb pulled her on a small sled. On Christmas Eve, sitting by the fire, they exchanged simple, handmade gifts. Eliza looked at Caleb and said, "A year ago I was so scared. I did not know if marrying a stranger was the best or worst decision of my life. Now, I know it was the best. You did not rescue me, Caleb. You gave me the space to rescue myself." He answered softly, "You saved me too. I was just a lonely man hiding in the wilderness. I needed you. I needed this family." Caleb started talking about the future. He mentioned maybe getting some sheep, adding a room onto the house for Sarah, and perhaps for more children down the line. Eliza smiled, placing a hand on her stomach. "I would like that," she said. "Sarah should have a brother or a sister." Caleb's promise was as solid as the mountains around them. "You two will never be alone. We are a family, and we face everything together." Soon after, Eliza confirmed she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy. Their family was not just surviving, it was growing strong. 2 years ago, Eliza had been a frightened girl running from a terrible life. Now she was a mother, a wife, and a respected part of a community that stood together. Her old life felt like a distant nightmare. One evening, as she and Caleb worked in the garden, Mrs. Chen came to visit. "Eliza," the older woman said, "the women of the valley are starting our own association, a way to support each other. After how you handled Hayes, we were all hoping you would agree to help lead it." A warmth spread through Eliza's chest. They wanted her to lead. Here in this beautiful, rugged land, she had finally found her strength and her true home. Mrs. Chen smiled. "We want you to lead the new community council. You are smart, capable, and you understand what it means to need help. You would be perfect." Eliza was honored and accepted immediately. Later, she told Caleb, her eyes shining with tears, 2 years ago, I had nothing. I was sold like property. Now I have you and Sarah and another baby on the way. I have neighbors who respect me. I have a life that is mine." Caleb pulled her close. "You always had worth, Eliza. You just finally found people who could see it." "Or maybe," she said, "I finally learned to see it in myself." As autumn painted the mountains gold, Eliza felt a sense of peace she had never imagined. On a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years since she had arrived, she stood on her porch, her family beside her, her place in the community secure. She was finally home. Eliza stood on the porch with little Sarah on her hip, watching Caleb work out in the pasture. The Texas sun caught the dark in his hair. He looked strong and content, not thin and worried like he was 2 years ago. The hard lines around his eyes had turned into laugh lines. He saw her looking and gave a big wave. She waved back, and he started for the house with a slow, easy walk. "Supper is ready," she called out. "I am starving," he hollered back. "What are we having?" "Stew, fresh bread, and apple pie from those preserves Mrs. Chen gave us." "Well, that sounds mighty fine." He walked up the steps, gave her a quick kiss, and then kissed Sarah's forehead. "Everything I could ever want is right here," he said softly. "Everything we need," Eliza corrected, looking at their small family in the ranch. That night, after Sarah was asleep, they sat by the fire like they always did. Caleb was whittling a small wooden horse for Sarah. Eliza was stitching a quilt for the new baby on the way. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked her quietly. "Coming all the way out here, marrying a man you barely knew?" Eliza stopped her sewing and shook her head. "Never. Not for 1 second. Every single hard thing we went through was worth it. It all led us to this. We're a force of nature together, stronger than we ever were apart. She put down her sewing and looked him square in the eye. You gave me a shot when I was at rock bottom. You showed me kindness when all I ever knew was a heavy hand. And somewhere on this dusty ranch, you gave me what I thought I'd lost forever. He asked, "What is that?" "A real home. A place where I matter, where I am loved." She laid a hand on her belly, where their second child was growing. "You gave me a family, Caleb. That is everything." He set down his whittling and knelt before her. "You did the same for me. Before you, I was just a man going through the motions, my heart turning to stone. You brought me back to the living. You made this ranch a home, not just a patch of dirt. I loved you before I even knew the word, and I choose you every single day, not because I have to, but because you are the best part of my life." Tears of pure joy streamed down Eliza's face. "We saved each other," she whispered. "We sure did," he answered, "and we will keep on saving each other for all our days." Outside, the first quiet snow of the season began to fall, laying a clean white blanket over the land. Inside, the fire crackled warm and steady while Sarah slept in her cradle. Eliza and Caleb held on to each other, thankful for the desperate choice that brought them to this perfect moment. The frightened girl who had fled her old life was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own grit. The lonely rancher who had sent for a wife was now a husband and a father who understood what love truly meant. Together they had built a life from nothing but hope and hard work. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was real. It was earned. And as the snow fell and their daughter slept, that was more than enough. It was their whole world. Years from now, they would tell Sarah the story. They would tell her about the train station where two strangers took a leap of faith. They would tell her how a hard winter tested them and how the spring renewed their hope. They would teach her that real courage is about standing up for what is right, and that true strength is found in partnership. Most of all, they would make sure she knew she was wanted, loved, and proof that taking a scary risk can lead to the most beautiful reward. The life that began in a desperate escape had become something solid and true, a family built to last. They were not just surviving anymore, they were truly living. Eliza Rowan had arrived in those mountains carrying nothing but fear. She stayed and built a kingdom out of courage and love, and she never for a second regretted the gamble that saved them both. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.